Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris in Book 2, Chapter 5. The men leaned from the cabs towards each other, frantic with excitement, shouting curses, the engines rocking, the steam roaring, confusion whirling in the scene like the whirl of a witch's dance. The white clouds of steam, the black eddies from the smokestack, the blue wreaths from the hot mouths of the revolvers swirling together in a blinding maze of vapor, spinning around them, dazzling them, dizzying them, while the head rang with the hideous clamor and the body twitched and trembled with the leap and jar of the tumult of machinery. Roaring, clamoring, reeking with the smell of powder and hot oil, spitting death, resistless, huge, furious, an abrupt vision of chaos, faces, rage distorted, peering through smoke, hands gripping outward from sudden darkness, prehensile, malevolent, terrible as thunder. Swift as lightning, the two engines met and passed. "He's hit," cried Delaney. "I know I hit him. He can't go far now. After him again. He won't dare go through Bonneville." It was true. Dyke had stood between the cab and tender throughout all of the duel, exposed, reckless, thinking only of attack and not of defense, and a bullet from one of the pistols had grazed his hip. How serious was the wound he did not know, but he had no thought of giving up. He tore back through the depot at Guadalajara in a storm of bullets and, clinging to the broken window ledge of his cab, was carried towards Bonneville, on over the long trestle and Broderson Creek and through the open country between the two ranches of Los Muertos and Quince-Abe. But to go on to Bonneville meant certain death. Before as well as behind him, the roads were now blocked. Once more he thought of the mountains. He resolved to abandon the engine and make another final attempt to get into the shelter of the hills in the northernmost corner of Quince-Abe. He set his teeth. He would not give in. There was one more fight left in him yet. Now to try the final hope. He slowed the engine down and, reloading his revolver, jumped from the platform to the road. He looked about him, listening. All around him widened an ocean of wheat. There was no one in sight. The released engine, alone, unattended, drew slowly away from him, jolting ponderously over the rail joints. As he watched it go, a certain indefinite sense of abandonment, even in that moment, came over Dyke. His last friend, that also had been his first, was leaving him. He remembered that day, long ago, when he had opened the throttle of his first machine. Today it was leaving him alone, his last friend turning against him. Slowly it was going back towards Bonneville, to the shops of the railroad, the camp of the enemy, that enemy that had ruined him and wrecked him. For the last time in his life he had been the engineer. Now once more he became the highwayman, the outlaw against whom all hands were raised, the fugitive skulking in the mountains, listening for the cry of dogs. But he would not give in. They had not broken him yet. Never while he could fight would he allow S. Behrman the triumph of his capture. He found his wound was not bad. He plunged into the wheat on Quince-Abe, making northward for a division house that rose with its surrounding trees out of the wheat, like an island. He reached it, the blood squelching in his shoes. But the sight of two men, Portuguese farmhands, staring at him from an angle of the barn, abruptly roused him to action. He sprang forward with peremptory commands demanding a horse. At Guadalajara, Delaney and the sheriff descended from the freight engine. "Horses now," declared the sheriff. "He won't go into Bonneville, that's certain. He'll leave the engine between here and there and strike off into the country. We'll follow him after, now in the saddle. Soon as he leaves his engine, he's on foot. We've as good as got him now." Their horses, including even the buckskin mare that Dyke had ridden, were still at the station. The party swung themselves up, Delaney exclaiming, "Here's my mount," as he bestrode the buckskin. At Guadalajara, the two bloodhounds were picked up again. Urging the jaded horses to a gallop, the party set off along the upper road, keeping a sharp lookout to the right and left for traces of Dyke's abandonment of the engine. 3 miles along the long trestle, they found S. Behrman holding his saddle horse by the bridle and looking attentively at a trail that had been broken through the standing wheat on Quinsabe. The party drew rein. "The engine passed me on the tracks further up and empty," said S. Behrman. "Boys, I think he left her here." But before anyone could answer, the bloodhounds gave tongue again as they picked up the scent. "That's him," cried S. Behrman. "Get on, boys." They dashed forward, following the hounds. S. Behrman laboriously climbed to his saddle, panting, perspiring, mopping the roll of fat over his coat collar, and turned in after them, trotting along far in the rear, his great stomach and tremulous jowl shaking with the horse's gait. "What a day," he murmured, "what a day." Dyke's trail was fresh and was followed as easily as if made on new-fallen snow. In a short time, the posse swept into the open space around the division house. The two Portuguese were still there, wide-eyed, terribly excited. Yes, Dyke had been there not half an hour since, had held them up, taken a horse, and galloped to the northeast, toward the foothills at the headwaters of Broderson Creek. On again at full gallop through the young wheat, trampling it under the flying hoofs. The hounds hot on the scent, baying continually, the men on fresh mounts secured at the division house, bending forward in their saddles, spurring relentlessly. S. Behrman jolted along far in the rear, and even then harried through an open country where there was no place to hide. It was a matter of amazement how long a chase the highwaymen led them. Fences were passed, fences whose barbed wire had been slashed apart by the fugitive's knife. The ground rose underfoot, the hills were at hand, still the pursuit held on. The sun, long past the meridian, began to turn earthward. Would night come on before they were up with him? Look, there he is, quick, there he goes. High on the bare slope of the nearest hill, all the posse, looking in the direction of Delaney's gesture, saw the figure of a horseman emerge from an arroyo filled with chaparral and struggle at a laboring gallop straight up the slope. Suddenly every member of the party shouted aloud. The horse had fallen, pitching the rider from the saddle. The man rose to his feet, caught at the bridle, missed it, and the horse dashed on alone. The man, pausing for a second, looked around, saw the chase drawing nearer, then, turning back, disappeared in the chaparral. Delaney raised a great whoop. "We've got you now!" Into the slopes and valleys of the hills dashed the band of horsemen, the trail now so fresh that it could be easily discerned by all. On and on it led them, a furious, wild scramble straight up the slopes. The minutes went by. The dry bed of a rivulet was passed, then another fence, then a tangle of manzanita, a meadow of wild oats full of agitated cattle, then an arroyo thick with chaparral and scrub oaks. and then, without warning, the pistol shots ripped out and ran from rider to rider with the rapidity of a Gatling discharge, and one of the deputies bent forward in the saddle, both hands to his face, the blood jetting from between his fingers. Dyke was there, at bay at last, his back against a bank of rock, the roots of a fallen tree serving him as a rampart, his revolver smoking in his hand. "You're under arrest, Dyke," cried the sheriff. "It's not the least use to fight. The whole country is up." Dyke fired again, the shot splintering the foreleg of the horse the sheriff rode. The posse, 4 men all told, the wounded deputy having crawled out of the fight after Dyke's first shot, fell back after the preliminary fusillade, dismounted, and took shelter behind rocks and trees. On that rugged ground, fighting from the saddle was impracticable. Dyke, in the meanwhile, held his fire, for he knew that, once his pistol was empty, he would never be allowed time to reload. "Dyke," called the sheriff again, "for the last time, I summon you to surrender." Dyke did not reply. The sheriff, Delaney, and the man named Christian conferred together in a low voice. Then Delaney and Christian left the others, making a wide detour up the sides of the arroyo to gain a position to the left and somewhat to the rear of Dyke. But it was at this moment that Spearman arrived. It could not be said whether it was courage or carelessness that brought the railroad's agent within reach of Dyke's revolver. Possibly he was really a brave man, possibly occupied with keeping an uncertain seat upon the back of his laboring, scrambling horse. He had not noticed that he was so close upon that scene of battle. He certainly did not observe the posse lying upon the ground behind the sheltering rocks and trees, and before anyone could call a warning, he had ridden out into the open within 30 paces of Dyke's entrenchment. Dyke saw. There was the arch-enemy, the man of all men whom he most hated, the man who had ruined him, who had exasperated him and driven him to crime, and who had instigated tireless pursuit through all these past terrible weeks. Suddenly, in fighting death, he leaped up and forward. He had forgotten all else, all other considerations, at the sight of this man. He would die gladly, so only that Spearman died before him. "I've got you anyway," he shouted as he ran forward. The muzzle of the weapon was not 10 feet from Spearman's huge stomach as Dyke drew the trigger. Had the cartridge exploded, death, certain and swift, would have followed. But at this, of all moments, the revolver missed fire. Spearman, with an unexpected agility, leaped from the saddle, and keeping his horse between him and Dyke, ran, dodging and ducking from tree to tree. His first shot a failure, Dyke fired again and again at his enemy, emptying his revolver, reckless of consequences. His every shot went wild, and before he could draw his knife, the whole posse was upon him. Without concerted plans, obeying no signal but the promptings of the impulse that snatched, unerring, at opportunity, the men, Delaney and Christian from one side, the sheriff and the deputy from the other, rushed in. They did not fire. It was Dyke alive they wanted. One of them had a riata snatched from a saddle pommel, and with this they tried to bind him. The fight was 4-1. 4 men with law on their side to one wounded freebooter, half-starved, exhausted by days and nights of pursuit, worn down with loss of sleep, thirst, privation, and the grinding, nerve-wracking consciousness of an ever-present peril. They swarmed upon him from all sides, gripping at his legs, at his arms, his throat, his head, striking, clutching, kicking, falling to the ground, rolling over and over, now under, now above, now staggering forward, now toppling back. Still Dyke fought. Through that scrambling, struggling group, through that maze of twisting bodies, twining arms, straining legs, Spearman saw him from moment to moment, his face flaming, his eyes bloodshot, his hair matted with sweat. Now he was down, pinned under, 2 men across his legs, and now halfway up again, struggling to one knee. Then upright again, with half his enemies hanging on his back. His colossal strength seemed doubled. When his arms were held, he fought bull-like with his head. A score of times it seemed as if they were about to secure him, finally and irrevocably. And then he would free an arm, a leg, a shoulder, and the group that, for the fraction of an instant, had settled, locked and rigid on its prey, would break up again as he flung a man from him, reeling and bloody, and he himself twisting, squirming, dodging, his great fists working like pistons, backed away, dragging and carrying others with him. More than once he loosened almost every grip, and for an instant stood nearly free, panting, rolling his eyes, his clothes torn from his body, bleeding, dripping with sweat, a terrible figure, nearly free. The sheriff, under his breath, uttered an exclamation. "My God, he'll get away yet." Spearman watched the fight complacently. "That all may show obstinacy," he commented, "but it don't show common sense." Yet, however, Dyke might throw off the clutches and fettering embraces that encircled him, however he might disintegrate and scatter the band of foes that heaped themselves upon him, however he might gain one instant of comparative liberty, some one of his assailants always hung doggedly, blindly to an arm, a leg, or a foot, and the others, drawing a second's breath, closed in again, implacable, unconquerable, ferocious, like hounds upon a wolf. At length, 2 of the men managed to bring Dyke's wrists close enough together to allow the sheriff to snap the handcuffs on him. Even then, Dyke, clasping his hands and using the handcuffs themselves as a weapon, knocked down Delaney by the crushing impact of the steel bracelets upon the cowpuncher's forehead. But he could no longer protect himself from attacks from behind, and the riata was finally passed around his body, pinioning his arms to his sides. After this, it was useless to resist. The wounded deputy sat with his back to a rock, holding his broken jaw in both hands. The sheriff's horse, with its splintered foreleg, would have to be shot. Delaney's head was cut from temple to cheekbone. The right wrist of the sheriff was all but dislocated. The other deputy was so exhausted he had to be helped to his horse. But Dyke was taken. He himself had suddenly lapsed into semi-unconsciousness, unable to walk. They sat him on the buckskin, Spearman supporting him, the sheriff on foot leading the horse by the bridle. The little procession formed and descended from the hills, turning in the direction of Bonneville. A special train, 1 car and an engine, would be made up there, and the highwaymen would sleep in the Visalia jail at night. Delaney and Spearman found themselves in the rear of the cavalcade as it moved off. The cowpuncher turned to his chief. "Well, Captain," he said, still panting as he bound up his forehead. "Well, we got him." Chapter 6. Osterman cut his wheat that summer before any of the other ranchers, and as soon as his harvest was over, organized a jackrabbit drive. Like Annixter's barn dance, it was to be an event in which all the countryside should take part. The drive was to begin on the most western division of the Osterman Ranch, where it would proceed towards the southeast, crossing into the northern part of the Quien Sabe. on which Annixter had sown no wheat, and ending in the hills at the headwaters of Broderson Creek, where a barbecue was to be held. Early on the morning of the day of the drive, as Heron and Presley were saddling their horses before the stables on Los Muertos, the foreman Phelps remarked, "I was into town last night, and I hear the Christian has been after Ruggles early and late to have him put him in possession here on Los Muertos, and Delaney is doing the same for Quien Sabe." It was this man Christian, the real estate broker and cousin of S. Behrman, one of the main actors in the drama of Dyke's capture, who had come forward as a purchaser of Los Muertos when the railroad had regraded its holdings on the ranches around Bonneville. He claims, of course, Phelps went on, that when he bought Los Muertos of the railroad, he was guaranteed possession, and he wants the place in time for the harvest. "That's almost as thin," muttered Heron as he thrust the bit into his horse's mouth, "as Delaney buying Annixter's home ranch. That slice of Quien Sabe, according to the railroad's grading, is worth about $10,000. Yes, even 15. And I don't believe Delaney is worth the price of a good horse. Why, those people don't even try to preserve appearances. Where would Christian find the money to buy Los Muertos? There's no one man in all Bonneville rich enough to do it. Damned rascals. As if we didn't see that Christian and Delaney are S. Behrman's right and left hands. Well, you'll get 'em cut off," he cried with sudden fierceness, "if he comes too near the machine." "How is it, Heron?" asked Presley as the two young men rode out of the stable yard. "How is it that the railroad king can do anything before the Supreme Court hands down a decision?" "Well, you know how they talk," growled Heron. "They have claimed that the cases are taken up to the Supreme Court were not test cases as we claim they are, and that because neither Annixter nor the governor appealed, they've lost their cases by default. It's a rottenest kind of sharp practice, but it won't do any good. The League is too strong. They won't dare move on us while yet. Why, Press, the moment they try to jump any of these ranches around here, they would have 600 rifles cracking at them as quick as how do you do. Why, it would take a regiment of U.S. soldiers to put any one of us off our land. No, sir, they know the League means business this time." As Presley and Heron trotted on along the county road, they continually passed or overtook other horsemen or buggies, carryalls, buckboards, or even farm wagons going in the same direction. These were full of farming people from all the country round about Bonneville on their way to the rabbit drive. The same people seen at the barn dance in their Sunday finest, the girls in muslin frocks and garden hats, the men with linen dusters over their black clothes, the older women in prints and dotted calicos. Many of these latter had already taken off their bonnets. The day was very hot, and pinning them in newspapers stowed them under the seats. They tucked their handkerchiefs into the collars of their dresses or knotted them about their fat necks to keep out the dust. From the axle trees of the vehicles swung carefully covered buckets of galvanized iron in which the lunch was packed. The younger children, the boys with great frilled collars, the girls with ill-fitting shoes cramping their feet, leaned from the sides of buggy and carryall, eating bananas and macaroons, staring about with ox-like stolidity. Tied to the axles, the dogs followed the horses' hoofs with lolling tongues coated with dust. The California summer lay blanket-wise and smothering over all the land. The hills, bone dry, were browned and parched. The grasses and wild oats, sere and yellow, snapped like glass filaments underfoot. The roads, the bordering fences, even the lower leaves and branches of the trees, were thick and gray with dust. All color had been burned from the landscape except in the irrigated patches that in the waste of the brown and dull yellow glowed like oases. The wheat, now close to its maturity, had turned from pale yellow to golden yellow, and from that to brown. Like a gigantic carpet, it spread itself over all the land. There was nothing else to be seen but the limitless sea of wheat, as far as the eye could reach, dry, rustling, crisp, and harsh in the rare breaths of hot wind out of the southeast. As Heron and Presley went along the county road, the number of vehicles and riders increased. They overtook and passed Hooven and his family in the former's farm wagon, a saddled horse tied in the back to the backboard. The little Dutchman, wearing the old frock coat of Magnus de Eric and a new broad-brimmed straw hat, sat on the front seat with Mrs. Hooven. The little girl, Hilda, the older daughter, Mina, were behind him on a board laid across the sides of the wagon. Presley and Heron stopped to shake hands. "Say," cried Hooven, exhibiting an old but extremely well-kept rifle. "Say, by God me, I take some shots at those rabbit, you bet. When he have stopped to run and sit up so by their hind legs on, I open with their gun and bang! I get 'em." "The marshals won't allow you to shoot, Bismarck," observed Presley, looking at Mina. Hooven doubled up with merriment. "Ho, ho, ho! That's hell of some fine joke. Me, I'm one of those marshals myself," he roared with delight, berating his knee. To his notion, the joke was irresistible. All day long he could be heard repeating it. "On Mr. Presley," he say, "those marshals won't let you shoot, Bismarck. And me, ach God, me, ain't I myself one of those marshals?" As soon as the two friends rode on, Presley had in his mind the image of Mina Hooven, very pretty, in a clean gown of pink gingham, a cheap straw sailor hat from a Bonneville store on her blue-black hair. He remembered her very pale face, very red lips, and eyes of greenish blue. A pretty girl, certainly, always trailing a group of men behind her. Her love affairs were the talk of all Los Muertos. "I hope that Hooven girl won't go to the bad," Presley said to Heron. "No, she's all right," the other answered. "There's nothing vicious about Mina, and I guess she'll marry that foreman on the ditch gang right enough." "Well, as a matter of course, she's a good girl," Presley hastened to reply. "Only she's too pretty for a poor girl, and too sure of her prettiness besides. That's the kind," he continued, "who would find it pretty easy to go wrong if they lived in the city." Around Carraher's was a veritable throng. Saddle horses and buggies by the score were clustered underneath the shed or hitched to the railings in front of the watering trough. 3 of Broderson's Portuguese tenants and a couple of workmen from the railroad shops in Bonneville were on the porch, already very drunk. Continually, young men, singly or in groups, came from the doorway, wiping their lips with sidelong gestures of the hand. The whole place exhaled the febrile bustle of the saloon on a holiday morning. The procession of teams streamed on through Bonneville, reinforced at every street corner. Along the upper road from Quinsabe and Guadalajara came fresh auxiliaries, Spanish Mexicans from the town itself, swarthy young men on capering horses, dark-eyed girls and matrons in red and black and yellow, more Portuguese in brand-new overalls, smoking long, thin cigars. Even Father Sarria appeared. "Look," said Presley, "there goes Annixter and Hilma. He's got his buckskin back. The master of King's Abbey in top-laced boots and campaign hat, a cigar in his teeth, followed along beside the carryall. Hilma and Mrs. Derrick were on the back seat, young Vaca driving. Heron and Presley bowed, taking off their hats. "Hello, hello, Press!" cried Annixter over the heads of the intervening crowd, standing up in his stirrups and waving a hand. "Great day! What a mob, eh? Say, when this thing is over and everybody starts to walk into the barbecue, come and have lunch with us. I'll look for you and Heron. Hello, Heron. Where's the governor?" "He didn't come today," Heron shouted back as the crowd carried him further away from Annixter. "Left him at Old Broderson at Los Muertos." The throng emerged into the open country again, spreading out upon the Osterman ranch. From all directions could be seen horses and buggies driving across the stubble, converging upon the rendezvous. Osterman's ranch house was left to the eastward, the army of guests hurrying forward, for it began to be late, to where around a fat flagpole flying a red flag a vast crowd of buggies and horses was already forming. The marshals began to appear. Hooven, descending from the farm wagon, pinned his white badge to his white hat brim and mounted his horse. Osterman, in marvelous riding clothes of English pattern, galloped up and down upon his best thoroughbred, cracking jokes with everybody, chaffing, joshing, his great mouth distended in a perpetual grin of amiability. Stop here, he vociferated, dashing along in front of Presley and Heron, waving his crop. The procession came to a halt, the horses' heads pointing eastward. The line began to be formed, the marshals perspiring, shouting, fretting, galloping about, urging this one forward, ordering this one back, ranged the thousands of conveyances and cavaliers in a long line shaped like a wide-open crescent.